We will just dive in as we wait for everybody to join. Welcome and thank you for being here today. My name is Jeff Conant and I direct the International Forest Program with Friends of the Earth US. I am sitting in the territory of the Pocumtuck and Nipmuc peoples of Massachusetts, a place that saw some of the very first of the brutal violence against the peoples of North America that forever changed the course of history, and that is part of what I bear in mind as I engage in the global struggle for climate justice, reparations, and ecological integrity. As we get started, I'd like to ask each of you to drop your name and pronouns and where you're joining us from today in the chat. If you don't know what Indigenous territory you are in or on, now is a great time to learn, and there's a great resource that we've put in the chat as well. So it's always a good time to learn more about settler colonialism and our own implications in that. And to get us grounded as we get going, I'm going to ask Xiomara Chingate to welcome us in with an invocation.
Thank you, Jeff. My name is Xiomara Chingate, and as I, an Indigenous Muisca woman from occupied Colombia, am speaking from Peoria, Miami, Kaskaskia, and Cahokia territories in central Illinois, I want to offer acknowledgement to the ancestors of this land, as well as all of Turtle Island and Abya Yala, all of the places where we are calling in from, as we recognize that wherever you are standing, you are on stolen native land. What a responsibility we all carry to remind one another and all around us that we are walking on the ancestral lands and among the spirits of the hundreds of millions of murdered Indigenous people, and recognize that we are still here as Indigenous people, and the effort put into so violently ridding this land and all colonized lands of their original inhabitants was a failure, and that we continue to thrive and resist colonization, white supremacy, and the abuse of the sacred system of life. We as Indigenous people are the frontline guardians to Mother Earth and our territories, whether they are recognized by the white supremacist governmental systems or not. I offer my heart and my prayers to all of our relatives who have been and continue to be impacted by the mechanisms of colonization, such as alcohol, addiction, and weaponizing our sacred medicines. May they know that they are beloved and deserve to thrive and feel the joyful, loving support of community and the support of all the spirit beings that carry us and see us in our most difficult moments. I invite our allies to seek ways to learn and connect with local Indigenous people, communities, and projects, and actively search out ways that they are asking for support and solidarity. What a blessing it is to be here now in this time, now with all of you, and being charged with such a large responsibility of protecting our earth, our rights, and our futures, because it will take all of us together, bringing all of our gifts and all of our offerings to the table in this journey for liberation from white supremacy, capitalism, and the continual destruction of our communities, health, and planet. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Xiomara. And with that, today, the Stop the Money Pipeline Coalition is kicking off a month of action to build the movement to defund deforestation. Throughout the month, we're going to be picking up the pressure on several targets who play a major role in global deforestation and human rights abuses, including big asset managers like BlackRock and TIAA, and the shareholders of consumer companies like Procter & Gamble. Over the next hour, we're going to hear from several leaders in the global climate and land justice movements about the links between forests, land, climate, and human rights, and several interrelated campaigns that are taking on these issues. We'll hear from our speakers, and in between the presentations, we're going to break to take 2 digital actions together. When we get to these actions, we'll walk you through the instructions so we can actually use our time together to directly partake in the movements that we're building. After the speakers and the actions, we hope to have time for some interactive dialogue, so I hope you will stick around until the end. And I'm going to kick us off with a few minutes of sort of context setting. I think, as we all know, we are living through a climate emergency that we can expect to upend everything about life as we know it. I tend to think about it personally in terms framed by the great eco-philosopher and activist Joanna Macy in what she calls the Great Turning. We're in a moment when we can either let our entire global society collapse, or we can use all of our resources and our vast collective intelligence to correct course and create a more just and ecological society in what I think we have every reason to believe will be the ruins of industrial civilization. We know that the main cause of rising emissions in the atmosphere that cause global heating is burning fossil fuels, and we know that if we are to have a chance, we need to rapidly phase out fossil fuel use. But doing that alone won't be enough. The second leading driver of the climate crisis is global deforestation. Every year, the world loses an area of forest the size of the United Kingdom. If you look at the slide here, if deforestation were its own country, it would be the third leading emitter of greenhouse gases after the US and China. The primary cause of forest destruction, especially in the tropics, is the expansion of monoculture plantations for just 6 commodities: palm oil, soy, paper, timber, cattle, and rubber. And I'll also note the expansion of the biomass industry as a threat that we'll hear about later today. If you look at the slide here, in the global north, you see the big green and brown circles. That tells us that the leading causes of deforestation in the north are wildfire and forestry. By forestry, we mean timber plantations and destruction of primary forests for timber. In the global south, if you look at the red in those circles, that is commodity-driven deforestation, meaning clearance of land for palm oil, soy, cattle, pulp and paper, timber, and rubber primarily. The big goal of the Stop the Money Pipeline deforestation campaigns is to halt the expansion of these industries and to help catalyze a transition to a more forest-positive future. Now, the most basic fact about forests and our relation to them is this: we breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide. Trees breathe out oxygen and breathe in carbon dioxide. So to put it in the simplest terms, we need each other in order to maintain the fabric of life on Earth. Of course, forests and the deforestation problem are not only about climate change. We're living through the 6th mass extinction event, a crisis of biodiversity loss that also has everything to do with the loss of the temples of life that we call forests. And forests and land are also at the heart of struggles for human rights, and especially the rights of Indigenous peoples and others who directly depend upon and steward the land. A third interrelated crisis we are witnessing, along with climate and biodiversity loss, is an epidemic of violence and murder of land and environmental defenders. Last year, according to Global Witness, 227 environmental human rights defenders were killed across the world. That's an average of 4 killings a week. The second deadliest sector, the industrial sector responsible for more killings than any other except for mining, is agribusiness. So it is no exaggeration to say that the agribusiness industry writ large is criminalizing, harassing, intimidating, and killing land defenders across the world in order to gain access to their lands and their resources. So this is why we say the best way to defend forests is to defend and protect forest defenders themselves. And it's in this sense that land justice and forest defense is climate justice. At COP26 last year, over 100 countries pledged to provide $20 billion in financing to halt and reverse global deforestation by 2030. But some estimates of the cost to actually deal with the deforestation crisis range as high as $500 billion per year. And so that 20 billion that the world's governments pledged last year is vastly insufficient. We also know that a lot of the financing from governments will likely go to what we call false solutions, like forest carbon markets and conservation measures like protected areas that tend to marginalize and exclude Indigenous peoples. Also at COP26 last year, more than 30 financial institutions with a collective almost $9 trillion in assets under management committed to use their portfolio power to eliminate agricultural commodity-driven deforestation from their shareholdings by 2025, which is a little bit better than 2030. So that's good, but these financial institutions tended to be the ones that are already committed to responsible investment. Meanwhile, the really big financial institutions like BlackRock, Vanguard, and TIAA, as well as most of the big banks, are, thanks to our movements, aware of the problem, but are doing everything they can to come up with cosmetic approaches that do everything but tackle the root causes of the crisis. So let's move on and hear from our speakers. I guess I need to see, do we have Vicky Tauli-Corpus with us? Because we, let's see if Vicky has joined us. It looks like she has not. One of our speakers today is supposed to be Vicky Tauli-Corpus, director of the Tebteba Foundation and former UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, but it looks like she has not been able to join us. So I think we'll hope that she can join us later. If in any case, I think we should move on to have Xiomara come back. Xiomara is an organizer with the Sunrise Project and is going to break down the role of financial institutions like asset managers in driving climate injustice. Xiomara, I hand it over to you.
Thank you. Before I get started, I actually don't know if you want me to wait till the end, but I saw a question here about the slide for activists killed in Colombia. And I just wanted to share that that's actually a smaller number than 2020, which was 138 people that were killed. And there are a myriad of reasons that we could get into, but I wanted to just share that if we think 65 is a lot, there's a lot more people that are not even registered as disappeared or killed for those reasons. But to move on, like Jeff said, my name is Xiomara Chingate. Before the Sunrise Project, I was an independent community organizer in the San Francisco Bay Area. And when I first started doing work that was pointing fingers at BlackRock specifically, I didn't really comprehend the depth of the web of financial interconnectedness. And I am still learning every day and continually horrified by the complicitness of financial institutions in not only funding projects that are driving climate chaos, but are also directly violating human rights and blatantly disregarding Indigenous voices, rights, and traditions. This includes frontline communities, which are often poor Black and Brown communities that live in close proximity to these toxic projects, whether in the San Francisco Bay Area refinery corridor, where 5 refineries are pumping poison into our air and lungs, or at extractive sites like in the Amazon rainforest, where rampant pollution is contaminating local water sources and spreading disease and death. The front lines are so diverse and oftentimes will include many of us against our will or even awareness and knowledge. So when a company needs funding for a pipeline, for example, there are a variety of places that they will go to shop their pipeline around. One source of funding is asset managers, which begs the question, what exactly is an asset manager? An asset manager is a financial institution that manages portfolios of invested wealth from clients ranging from government entities, corporations, and institutional investors like universities and pension funds to maximize returns. These entities are entrusting asset managers to make responsible decisions with their money, which doesn't sound too ominous, maybe a little bit, but you want to make sure that your investments are successfully making you money, right? However, this is where it gets kind of hairy, that much of the investments that asset managers like BlackRock and Vanguard are making are directly harming the health and vitality of our planet and our communities and our future generations. And speaking of pipelines, my hypothetical pipeline, I'm going to use a real life example. A Peruvian state-owned oil and gas company called Peru recently spent $5.3 billion in bonds, which are essentially loans, to modernize a refinery on the coast of Peru. They acquired the funding through selling bonds to banks and asset managers. And the refinery is now operating at less than anticipated output. So it's making it impossible for Petroperú to be able to repay the debt that they owe to their investors. And both Vanguard and BlackRock have invested in Petroperú, and they're going to want their money back, right? Well, Petroperú is now coming back seeking more funding for a new extractive project located in the traditional territory of the Wampis and Achuar nations in the Peruvian Amazon, which will provide oil for the refinery to make enough oil to repay their debts and then also turn a profit so they're making money. And this is where we can start to see the potential impacts that asset managers can have by taking an ethical stance on human rights, indigenous rights, and ecological preservation. Imagine if these enormously powerful institutions adopted and truly implemented, instead of releasing vague statements that don't actually commit them to anything, indigenous rights and human rights policies, forbidding investments in projects that deliberately violate human rights and indigenous people's sovereign rights to consent to what happens in their own ancestral territories. Imagine if they took it upon themselves to say, we will not invest in companies or projects that are knowingly causing ecological damage because the legacy of harm from these projects is felt so intensely, both locally and globally, given the state of climate change. No company would be able to secure the funding that they needed to pursue the initiatives that are keeping us dependent on fossil fuels. Imagine if they held their portfolio companies accountable for violating these protective policies. As we know, the extractive industry has historically abused people in resource-rich lands all over the world with impunity. We recognize that asset managers wield an enormous power and thus responsibility. The question is, will they actually recognize the impact that they would have on our futures and the generations to come if they had the courage and the decency to lead the way? Despite mixed feelings, we know that corporations are not people, but people run corporations. And so we can continually apply pressure to the people that are making these decisions and have power. We can continue to remind them that as long as they invest and fund harmful and destructive projects, they're directly responsible for the suffering of both human and non-human life on Mother Earth until it ultimately devolves into an uninhabitable planet. And at what point will they accept that money will not save us from an overheating planet? All that we can do is be relentless and steadfast in telling the truth without being afraid. And I invite you to seek ways to encourage your family and your friends who might have investments in BlackRock or Vanguard to investigate how their money is being used and show them how they can be a part of the campaigns that are pushing these financial giants to take responsibility and change course. So that's what I have to share with you about asset managers, and I hope that there's some clarity there and it was easily understood. And thank you so much for inviting me to come and speak.
Thank you, Xiomara. So yeah, the companies which asset managers invest in are causing serious harm to our climate and our communities, and we are all part of a movement to shift the way financing decisions are made and ideally shift the entire global financial sector towards less extractive approaches, I guess, to put it that way. The very largest asset management company in the world with $10 trillion in assets under management is BlackRock. And over the past 5 years or so, many of us have built a robust campaign called BlackRock's Big Problem that is targeting BlackRock specifically, well, first for its holdings in fossil fuels and for its holdings in forest risk or deforestation risk commodities, but also for its holdings in private prisons and detention centers, in weapons, and in the border industrial complex, as we call it. So look for that, BlackRock's Big Problem. And right now we're going to have our compañeros from Colectivo Viento Sur in Chile share a little bit about how they are fighting a corporation in Chile that BlackRock holds shares in. So I'll pass it on to our friends from Colectivo Viento Sur.
Hola, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thanks for the invitation. My name is Diego. I'm a member of Colectivo Viento Sur, and I'm here with my partner, Camila. who is also going to join us with a brief presentation of how the context is of extractivism based on the ancestral Mapuche land, what is called Walmapu. This presentation is from last year, that's why it says 2021, but it was a commemoration or a reminder of the 25 años, 25 years of invasion in the ancestral land by the companies, by the forestry companies, especially Arauco and CMPC as a pulp and cardboard producer. We have it is if the slides can all go passing, it's better, because we will be talking about the implications that this scenario had been pushed by force since the military coup in 1973, where the oligarchy of Chile emplaced themselves into Mapuche land with the whole force of the military assets that came from the United States, and the pushing of the Cold War against Marxist idealism. So that's how Allende's popular government was eradicated and had a strong impact on how public resources, or public goods, as we like to say, were given to very little amount of powerful people that now own this whole land. That is very is a great pain for the Mapuche people since then, because there has been a lot of violence from the state, militarization on the territory, imprisonment, violence, and deaths, and it has been really hard for the communities to stay together and to form the principles, to keep their principles in what these investors call the development or green development. So in that case, if there is a chance that can the slides can pass, it will be grateful. So maybe Camila can join us now and talk about this issue.
Muy buenas tardes. Imaynayam Kachankichik. Mi nombre es Camila Romero. My name is Camila. And with Diego Yarzo, we are part from Colectivo Viento Sur, a social and environmental organization. We don't speak English. We speak usually Spanish in where we live. In the south of Chile, also Mapuzungun is the native language, but with the colonization process, we have lost a lot of cultural traditions. And right now, we are in the time that the land is awakening, and as we are working on the defense of forest, of native forest, very old forest here in South. And so with the organization that Colectivo Viento Sur and the communities that are part of the coalitions that we work on, right now, we've been trying to inform the situation here in the territory. In Chile, more of 40% of social environmental conflicts are affecting indigenous territories. Here, especially in the Walmapu, which is the Mapuche territory, the forestry industry, especially Arauco, Arauco y Constitución has, as you can see in the pictures, you can see how here we find huge territories like this in the picture, and also much strong from people that right now are struggling, and we are trying to inform what are these impacts on culture, on health, and the land, and especially right now in the health, and the indigenous rights of living well, el buen vivir, el kume moñen, which is the main principle for our communities. So, well, as I said in the beginning, this is not my language, but I try to explain, and I hope you really can feel what we are living here, and as well, what are you living in your own territories. Is a huge feeling that I have right now to read in the text in the chat that you are doing a recognition of the native lands. That is very important, and I hope we can continue doing these meetings and in this recognition of the native languages as well, and or diversity that we are, as well as forest. So there are
Yes.
huge impacts, and I hope to share with you. We will put in the chat a link for a video that we've been working on a video to show the impacts, the social and environmental impacts on Mapuche territory. So there you can find and you can see all the history and that we try to resume in this short video. So yes, we don't have much time, but please, if we can stay in contact, we will put some links from organizations, and what are we working right now on a campaign of biomass, how the biomass right now is pushing more plantations and more production. So a big hug for everyone, and let's keep sharing and listening each other.
Okay, gracias, Camila y Diego. Thank you for that. So we express our solidarity with your struggle, and it's all of our struggle. And so there have been actions against BlackRock going on for years, and next Thursday, in New York during New York Climate Week, there will be a number of us, I think led by Indigenous women, meeting at BlackRock's New York headquarters to continue sending them the message. BlackRock and Vanguard are both the largest institutional shareholders in the company that owns Arauco, as you saw in the chat. So we need to team up and keep the pressure on. Moving on to another one of our favorite targets, TIAA Nuveen manages retirement funds for teachers, professors, academics, nonprofit professionals, nurses, and other people who are devoted to the social good across the country. And it paints itself as a socially responsible firm, but it is anything but. Right now, there are two campaigns that focus on TIAA. A group called TIAA Divest, who are presente here with us, is pushing hard to get TIAA to divest from fossil fuels, while the Stop Land Grabs campaign has been bringing attention to the multiple ways in which TIAA contributes to deforestation and land grabbing in the US, in Brazil, and around the world. And we're joined today by our esteemed colleague, Maria Luisa Mendonça, who is the director of the Rede Social de Justicia y Direitos Humanos, the Brazilian Network for Social Justice and Human Rights, and is a leader in the Stop Land Grabs campaign. and is an expert on TIAA's culpability in incentivizing the violent process of land evictions in Brazil. So Maria Luisa, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you all for the invitation. Yes, my organization, the Network for Social Justice and Human Rights in Brazil, we have been doing grassroots research and organizing for over 20 years. And after the 2008 global economic crisis and the collapse of the housing market in the US, we identified this new trend of financial corporations targeting farmland all over the world. And one of the main targets is Brazil. So we started to investigate that process, and we found out that a main player in that process is TIAA. At that time, it was called TIAA Craft, which is a very large pension fund based in the US, but also TIAA also receives funds from pension funds in Europe and in Canada. And although at that time, after the global financial crisis of 2008, the price of international commodities started to go down, but the price of land continued to increase. As you know, it continues today. So there is this movement of financial capital to control farmland. And although the main objective of these corporations is control over land, in order to justify that, they promote the expansion of agribusiness corporations, of monocropping plantations, especially in the case of Brazil, in that region, especially soy, but also sugarcane for the production of ethanol in partnership with oil companies. So, you know, the oil industry and the agribusiness industry are very much connected, also because agribusiness is one of the main causes of climate change, because it also depends on chemical inputs that are based on fossil fuels. So the main region these corporations targeted in Brazil is the Brazilian Cerrado, which is the most biodiverse savanna in the world. And it's a point of balance between the Amazon rainforest and the Atlantic rainforest. It's in the center part of the country, and it's a very important source of underground water, because the trees in the Cerrado are relatively short, but not very short, but their roots go on for many, many kilometers. So it's where the most important rivers in Brazil start. So it's an important region for underground water and river springs. And it also a point of equilibrium of rain cycles. So the destruction of the Cerrado has an impact in the northern hemisphere and in the south part of South America as well. So the main TIAA has a key role in promoting the expansion of agribusiness in this region. It is actually financing that process. And so we also, when we identified that, we also started to work closely with local communities in that region, indigenous communities, quilombolas, which are the rural Afro-Brazilian communities and other peasant communities that have been resisting in the land, communities that, you know, have lived in the region for many, many generations, and they have right to land, but they have been displaced because of this process. And of course, that these communities are also key to protecting the environment, to protecting biodiversity and local food production, ecological food production. So it's very important to have the connection between organizing on the ground and building international solidarity. So we started to coordinate together with Friends of the Earth and Actionar and other organizations here in the US, the Stop Land Grabs campaign, and also building links with other important campaigns, and also continuing doing organizing on the ground, because the international visibility and solidarity is very important to protect communities against death threats, against environmental destruction and violence. And as you know, TAA is a main pension fund at US universities. So we have been also building alliances and solidarity with students and faculty here in the US. So the international campaign here in the US also has a website, is the Stop Land Grab website. So it's very important to build alliances and to continue amplifying what TAA is doing. So because TAA, if we target TAA, that can have an important impact all over the world in terms of stopping land grabbing and deforestation. So thank you very much for your solidarity. And I'm gonna write our website also on the chat, so you can check out. We have published several reports and we have information in English and in Portuguese. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Maria Luisa. As you can all hear, this is super important work. And for folks who are already aware of the problems with TIA, I have to say it is you're aware of the problems largely because of the Stop Land Grabs campaign and the TIA Divest campaign. Proud to say too, I just put in the chat, Friends of the Earth has been working very closely with Maria Luisa and the Rede Social to publish their amazing research in English and to target some of the other agribusiness companies that we're concerned about, like Bunge, which is one of the many companies responsible for vast deforestation in the Cerrado in Brazil. And with that, it is time for our first action break. So Wall Street plays an active role in deforestation and the climate crisis and rights violations. And there's a lot that Wall Street investors need to do to address these issues. So we are going to send them a message that we're watching and that we're demanding action. Someone put in the chat the point that also this next week in New York, there will be an action at TIAA's headquarters. So leading up to that, we've just dropped a toolkit in the chat, and we'll spend a few minutes creating a Twitter storm. So you can see a link. If you open the toolkit, you'll see a link that will take you to a tweet to TIAA or from TIAA, I suppose. Copy one of the sample comments and respond to that tweet so that the fine people at TIAA know that we will not stand for their greenwashing. Becca, if you don't have a Twitter account, which is perfectly reasonable for folks who don't, we will have another chance. Actually, I think our other action later is also a social media action. Well, then for folks that don't have a Twitter account, this is not necessarily an avenue that you can, Ziamara points out that there are details in there for using Facebook and Instagram. Imagine folks who don't have Twitter may not have Instagram either. And I'll let the technical folks on the back end figure, is there a way to click on the link in the chat without losing the Zoom screen? It should open a separate window, I would think. Well, let's just see the folks that do have access to the Twitter will have to do that. And if you don't, if any of our technical people on the back end are able to jump in and help with some of the questions, that would be great. what we're trying to do here ultimately, we've been, since the pandemic, organizing webinars as a really, potentially potent way to get people together and figuring out ways that we can take digital actions together during the webinars. But obviously that's limited by, folks's use of social media. So for some of you, it may be that just getting this information and then knowing that you can join the Stop Land Grabs campaign if you go to stoplandgrabs.org, or you can join the TI Divest campaign by going to that website, and stay tuned. Maybe the thing to do if you want to get involved and don't tweet. And yeah, the toolkit is back in the chat, and it should be that if you click on the link, a separate window should pop up. And right, our friends out in the Pacific Northwest remind us that there's going to be a rally in Portland on October 6th, targeting TIA Nuveen. TIA and Nuveen have a new office out there for their, what's it called, TIA or Nuveen Natural Capital. That's a good term to be suspicious of. And TIA Nuveen are deeply invested and increasingly invested in timberlands across the US as well as in South America. And there's every reason to assume that they are going to use those timberlands to sell carbon credits into the carbon market to create a loophole for fossil fuel industries and others to meet their fallacious net zero commitments. So we are assuming that TIAA, through its timberlands, is getting more and more deeply involved in the false solutions to the climate crisis. So keep an eye on them. And someone's asking where they can find more info on the actions next week in New York, if one of our hosts can put that in the chat. And maybe with that, we should wrap up the action and move on to the role of consumer companies. Danielle Carrillo with Rainforest Action Network is going to come on and explain how Procter & Gamble is one of many consumer goods companies that are harming forests and communities across the world. And so, Danielle, assuming you're ready to speak, let's hear from you.
Yeah, hi, Jeff. I'm Harry. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Daniel Carrillo, I'm the campaign director for forest at Rainforest Action Network, calling from Tongva, Chumash Lands, Los Angeles, California. And like Jeff said, I'm going to be talking about the role of consumer companies in deforestation and rights violations. One example is Procter & Gamble, the brand that's behind products like Tide, Head & Shoulders, Olay, Crest. And P&G sources the ingredients for these products from suppliers that are complicit in destroying rainforests and livelihoods of indigenous communities by the expansion of palm oil plantations. One of the biggest palm oil suppliers in Indonesia is agribusiness giant Royal Golden Eagle. And they control millions of acres of land through a network of companies that produce both pulp and palm oil. It's one of the worst human rights offenders, and they're responsible for stealing indigenous lands in North Sumatra, Indonesia. Doing business with RGE makes Procter & Gamble complicit in the land grabs that are happening in Indonesia. The Pargamanan Bintang Maria community in the province of North Sumatra, Indonesia, is but one example of a community that's been impacted by RGE's operations. They continue to fight for their land that are occupied by RGE's pulp company, PT Toba Pulp Lustari, or TPL. And I want to introduce Delima Silalahi, who is a program director at an Indigenous rights organization in Indonesia. And she pre-recorded a statement, and we're going to hear from her own words on what's happening in Indonesia.
Saya Delima Silalahi, Direktur Program KSPPM, sebuah NGO lokal yang mendampingi petani dan masyarakat adat di Tanah Batak, Sumatera Utara, Indonesia. KSPPM juga merupakan bagian dari Aliansi Gerakan Rakyat Tutup TPL yang melakukan advokasi terhadap masyarakat adat di Tanah Batak dalam memperjuangkan hak mereka atas wilayah adat mereka yang dirampas oleh PT Toba Pak Lestari. PT Toba Pak Lestari merupakan perusahaan pulp and paper milik Taipan Sukanto Tanoto. PT TPL merupakan anak perusahaan dari Raja Garuda Mas atau yang dikenal dengan Royal Golden Eagle. Selain bergerak dalam sektor hutan tanaman industri, juga bergerak dalam sektor perkebunan sawit. Perusahaan ini banyak mensuplai perusahaan-perusahaan global seperti PNG. Nah, KSPPM dan Aliansi Gerakan Rakyat Tutup TPL saat ini sedang menuntut kepada pemerintah agar menutup PT Toba Pak Lestari karena perusahaan ini banyak melakukan pelanggaran HAM, perampasan tanah, pengerusakan hutan atau deforestasi, juga melakukan kriminalisasi terhadap masyarakat adat di Tanah Batak. Dalam 2 bulan terakhir, perusahaan ini mengkriminalisasi 2 komunitas masyarakat adat di Tanah Batak seperti masyarakat adat Siaporas, di mana perusahaan bersama dengan polisi dan TNI datang mengintimidasi masyarakat adat agar tidak melakukan kegiatan di wilayah adat mereka yang diklaim oleh PT TPL sebagai wilayah konsesi. Nah, ada ketegangan-ketegangan atau konflik yang terjadi antara pihak kepolisian dengan masyarakat adat di Siaporas. Kriminalisasi juga dilakukan di masyarakat adat Natinggir. Ada 7 masyarakat adat Natinggir di Kabupaten Toba yang saat ini sedang dalam proses pemanggilan ketiga oleh pihak Polres Toba karena mereka dituduh melakukan pengerusakan di wilayah konsesi PT Toba Pak Lestari, padahal masyarakat adat itu melakukan kegiatan penanaman tanaman pangan dan pohon-pohon di wilayah adat mereka, tapi oleh perusahaan mereka diadukan melakukan pengerusakan di wilayah konsesi. Nah, berangkat dari banyak hal pelanggaran HAM yang dilakukan oleh PT Toba Pak Lestari tersebut, KSPPM bersama Aliansi Gerak Tutup TPL tetap menuntut pemerintah supaya perusahaan ini segera ditutup. Nah, kami sangat berharap dukungan dari masyarakat internasional. Sebagaimana yang kami katakan tadi, bahwa perusahaan ini banyak mensuplai perusahaan-perusahaan global. Oleh karena itu kami berharap masyarakat internasional juga menyuarakan kepada perusahaan-perusahaan global seperti PNG untuk berhenti berbisnis dengan PT RGE. Karena apa? Karena dengan mereka berbisnis dengan PT RGE, PNG turut serta melakukan pelanggaran HAM di Tanah Batak, juga melakukan pengerusakan hutan di wilayah adat masyarakat adat, dan juga melakukan kriminalisasi terhadap masyarakat adat. Oleh karena itu kami meminta masyarakat internasional untuk mendesak para perusahaan-perusahaan global tersebut berhenti berbisnis dengan PT RGI dan tidak membeli produk dari mereka. Terima kasih.
Apologies for the problems with the subtitles, but Delima was summarizing the situation in Indonesia with the Batak indigenous communities in North Sumatra, and then also explaining the different police intimidation and violence they have faced in defending their land and fighting against RGE, the Royal Golden Eagle, and TPL to shut down those companies and return land to indigenous peoples. And I will also drop in the chat a link that has more information about Procter & Gamble in this community for folks to be able to check out. Now I'll end by saying that we need to pressure the shareholders of Procter & Gamble, like BlackRock and Vanguard, so they can leverage their power to be able to push P&G to stop sourcing from companies that are stealing land, like the one that Delima just spoke about. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Jeff.
All right, thank you, Daniel. It's so important to hear from the front lines, and I'd say especially from folks from, well, from, in this case, Indonesia, which is so far from most of our daily realities. And so Procter & Gamble is a member of the Consumer Goods Forum, which is the largest consortium of consumer goods companies in the world, which has claimed that it's going to deal with its deforestation problem, and it has not. And we're about to launch with Rainforest Action Network and other groups, NRDC and others. We're going to launch the second year of a campaign to have shareholders kick out 3 members of the board of Procter & Gamble, and that's going to launch next week. Just to add a little bit of color to that for our action break, the CEO of Procter & Gamble is new, and he just came over from Monsanto, one of our favorite companies, is responsible for toxifying our global environment. 2 of the people on Procter & Gamble's sustainability and social responsibility board committee come from Chevron, Shell, and ExxonMobil. So these are the people that are in charge of Procter & Gamble. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take an action break together, and we are going to tell P&G's shareholders to pressure the company to cut ties with suppliers like RGE and Astra Agrolestari that are harming communities, as we just heard in the video. So if you would, there's a new link in the chat to a toolkit, and yeah, Austin, please keep putting that in there because the chat's pretty active. Click on the link in the action toolkit, and you'll be able to, for you Twitter users out there, you'll be able to click on the link to tweet or download graphics that you can post on Facebook and Instagram. So please go ahead and do that. We're going to take a few minutes for this. In terms of how to target shareholders, that's part of what this social media action is. And while you all are taking action, I'll just share some of the details, which is that we have mapped out we have a list of all of the top shareholders in Procter & Gamble. And for the last few years, a coalition of environmental groups has been putting together investor risk briefs that we document a lot of the abuses that Procter & Gamble is linked to in the Canadian boreal forests and in the forests of Southeast Asia. We bring together that information with information about the financial, reputational, and legal risks that Procter & Gamble potentially faces for these investments or for doing business with these companies. And we engage directly with the shareholders to get them to force P&G to take action, and now to force P&G's board of directors to turn over. One of the folks here in the chat, Michael Zellniger, has done a tremendous, is working on, I think, a documentary about P&G's role in the Canadian boreal, and points out that we've had the great pleasure, several of us on the call, of working with the descendants of the Procter family and the Gamble family, who are leaders in the campaign to get the company that has their name attached to it to take action. And we actually think campaign-wise, we're quite close to getting P&G to take some much more robust action than they have yet taken. And really, this tactic of getting shareholders to vote out board members who are, laggards on climate and who are irresponsible in regards to human rights, I think is a very critical form of action that we can take. Babu asked where we find information for different companies and who make up the shareholders. That's where I'll put another. Let's see, do we have a current report on P&G's shareholders? Well, if you look at, Rainforest Action Network puts out tremendous information on this, as does Friends of the Earth. NRDC is doing tremendous work on the boreal forest. So I think in some of Rand's reports and some of Fo's reports, which I can dig up potentially, you can find some of the shareholders and banks that we're talking about. And I'll try to do that as soon as we get into the Q&A. And we have someone here with shares in P&G, so great. We'll be in touch about that. Shall we take maybe another minute for folks to act on the toolkit? And there's the toolkit back in the chat. I'll just keep answering questions here to Babu's question. Rainforest Action Network is one of the organizations that is a member of the Stop the Money Pipeline Coalition, as are all the rest of us here. Oh, and Michael, thank you for putting your link to your documentary in the chat. And I wonder, it looks like folks are having some trouble with the action. We were planning at this point in the program to move on to some Q&A. So let me just say, and we've got maybe 10 or so minutes left. So there will be more opportunities to take action, as we've said, next week on September 22nd. A number of us will be in New York City, where we are going to show up at a meeting of the Consumer Goods Forum to call out Procter & Gamble. We're going to be meeting at BlackRock's headquarters and at TIAA's headquarters. That's all on the morning of September 22nd. There will be a bunch of social media happening around that. So if you don't happen to be in Midtown Manhattan, look online for what's happening. You can go to blamewallstreet.org and you can RSVP to join us or to find another action near you. With the TIAA actions, there's going to be sort of distributed actions around the country. And if you're in the Pacific Northwest, you can join the action on October 6th at TIAA's office. And we'll share out the toolkit after the webinar, where you can find all the resources that the speakers have dropped into the chat, and keep taking action with us. So let us have some, yeah, if anyone wants to share, ask questions, now is the time. And I'll take a moment to catch my breath as we look for. If you have questions, I think you can put them. Oh, there's one in the Q&A. The one in the Q&A asked, do we think Bolsonaro will lose power? Yeah, that would be one for, I don't know, Maria Luisa, if you want to take a minute to give us your up-to-the-minute analysis of the Brazilian election scenario.
Yes, I mean, if we don't have another coup, because Bolsonaro is in power, we have to remember, because we had a parliamentary coup against President Dilma Rousseff in 2016. So that opened the space for Bolsonaro, and also Lula was in prison at that time during when we had the last presidential elections. And of course, there was no evidence against him. And now he's running again. And all the polls indicate that Lula will win this time. We have elections in about 2 weeks. So hopefully, this is going to happen if there is no foreign interference or no coup or no plot. The expectation is that Lula will win, and we need to keep the pressure anyway to fight agribusiness in Brazil. Whatever government we have, we need to keep pressure, our pressure against agribusiness and defending the land and defending rural communities in Brazil. So thank you for the question.
Thanks, Maria Luisa. I don't know if we can take this one, but someone else put in the Q&A possible targets for action in Germany. And I wonder, I'm stretching here, but our friend Meryl Vandermark from RAN is Dutch and may have a little more insight into targets for action in Germany. I mean, BlackRock is everywhere and certainly has offices in Germany. So they can be targeted there. There's a great group out of Germany called Robin Wood that does a lot of deforestation work. And Rainforest Relief, I'm forgetting the name in German, and also Biofuel Watch. We have some folks on here from Biofuel Watch, and they're in Germany as well. So there may be some links there. That's about the best I can do. Unless anyone else wants to chime in. And right, Maria Luisa points out that TIA manages, well, collects money from other pension funds around the world, which they invest, and the German some German public pension funds are connected to TIAA, so that's something to look into. Possible actions in Western Canada. I don't know if anybody on here, I know there's a lot of action around the forests of British Columbia. It looks like Mariah's typing something in there. I suspect others here may have connections to the timber actions happening in British Columbia. And then someone's asking, corporations are using deceptive advertising to tout faux environmental and climate change actions, and how does one uncover and verify these? That's a great question. I mean, that's part of what we're trying to do with TIAA. If you look at them, they're doing a lot of, and Procter and Gamble, they're doing a lot of greenwashing, and it's it can be very difficult to assess, you know, to detect truth from lies. Generally speaking, when companies have commitments to reach net zero emissions by 2050, that's something to really dig into. If that's their primary way of dealing with the climate, 2050 is 30 years from now. And net zero generally means that they're going to be buying carbon offsets rather than actually ramping down their carbon emissions. So that's something to look for. In terms of finance, you're seeing a lot about in ESG investing, environmental, social, and governance investing. TIA is one of the leaders of using that term, and just to be aware that there is no standardization and no requirements. It's not like, you know, USDA organic standards where there's a very specific meaning that gets you that organic certification, as weak as that itself may be. But if you're looking at investment funds and they're telling you, for example, TIA has a fund has several social choice funds, and if they're managing your retirement, they will tell you, you know, if you want sustainable funds, look at our social choice funds and use them. If you go to their social choice funds, you'll find, you know, Valero, Chevron, Total, Enbridge. You'll find them filled with toxic garbage. So really, I would say look to groups like those of us on the call. Look to Rainforest Action Network, Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, you know, to help parse the parse the lies and the greenwashing, and TIA divest if you're, so that's it's a full-time job for many of us who are blessed to be working full-time on this work. Any other questions that we should take? I'm a little overwhelmed by what's in the chat here. So if anybody else wants to pipe up, feel free. And who should you contact to participate in a seminar on deforestation on Amazonas about paths of action for students? I'd say, you know, our friends at Amazon Watch, who I don't know if we have anyone from there here with us today, but they're certainly one of the most active groups in the US on looking at the financing of forest destruction in the Amazon. So reach out, Asriel, to any of us, and we can try to put you in touch with folks that may be useful for that. And just looking in the chat here to see what else we need to do. Someone mentions, the Fossil Free California campaign. CalPERS, as someone just pointed out, has 42 billion still invested in fossil fuels. So there's and CalSTRS, so they're very active. There's a very active campaign in California on CalSTRS, the California Teachers Pension Fund. That would be a great way to get involved for folks who are in California. At Vanguard, there's a fairly new campaign, and maybe Xiomara, if you're still with us, you could speak to this. There's a growing campaign on Vanguard, billboards going up around their offices, and so forth. So I would say look for, what is it, Vanguard SOS, I think is what you're going to look for if you want to get active on Vanguard. And there it is. Xiomara's putting some things in the chat for you on Vanguard there. Who would you talk to at CalSTRS? I don't know if there's anyone else on the call who's involved in the CalSTRS campaign. The folks at Climate Hawks Vote in California have been very active on the CalSTRS campaign. If you wanted to talk to someone there, you would reach out. Generally, you would reach out to the corporate stewardship team at you. And if you're a CalSTRS, if you're a CalSTRS member, you would just reach out to the corporate stewardship team at CalSTRS and ask for a meeting and sit down and talk to them. And because you are a client and they are your public pension fund manager, they're obligated to meet with you. Also at CalSTRS and at any public pension fund, just so folks know, they have by law, they have monthly public meetings where you can go and share your views. So that's something to look up and look for. And yeah, Xiomara put in the chat vanguardsos.com. There's a lot of action happening on Vanguard on the fossil fuel side of things. And of course, the groups that are pressuring Vanguard on fossil fuels are also very, very concerned about deforestation. But as of now, I would say there's not an extremely organized and active campaign on Vanguard's role in deforestation, just because there's a lot to do from those of us who have been building these campaigns on investors. And but every little bit helps. I mean, to my mind, part of the thing that we all need to be doing is just publicly questioning where our money is, where our money's going, who's managing it, and who is whose hands are on the steering wheel as far as that goes, and raising our voices so that we can create a stronger public narrative about the fact that virtually all of the big investment funds are driving our planet to ruin. And I think it's about time to wrap up, unless anybody, if any of our panelists would like to have a final word, I would welcome you to do that. Meanwhile, go to blamewallstreet.org for the map of actions that you'll see in New York next week.
Jeff, I wanted to ask if I have my FBI cover on. There we go. The story that I shared with y'all about Petro Peru and Vanguard actually has a petition going to pressure them to commit to not investing in Petro Peru. And I wanted to ask if it would be okay if I share in the chat the link to the petition.
I don't see why not.
Okay, cool.
Personally, executive decision there.
Yeah. And if you go to Amazon Watch, you can click around and find the letter, the open letter that they wrote, in case you're wanting more concrete information about that. Thank you.
All right. Then I think with that, I just want to give a big thanks and round of applause to everybody that showed up to speak and present today, and especially our friends from Chile. And thank you guys for showing up, and we're with you down there. And yeah, muchas gracias, Diego and Camila and Maria Luisa. Thank you. And to the folks that put this together on the back end, you've done a tremendous job. So thanks, everyone.